Recording.
Excellent. Right, well, good evening, everybody. My aim this evening is to try and inspire you to have a go at doing some composing yourself. I think probably most people think it's a bit of a dark art, but I'd like to try and demystify it a bit for you. So I basically approached this from the viewpoint of what I think the key things would have been really useful to me when I first started on the journey of composing. So I want to sort of almost take you through a bit of a story of how I started off and the way that I approach things, and hopefully that will be a bit of an inspiration to you too, that you might want to have a go yourselves. So the first thing, just a few things to think about, a few questions that I thought were just interesting to think about at the beginning. So what are the duties of a composer? Now, obviously, we're talking in the context of bell ringing here, not as a musical composer. So these are the sort of top things that I think are the duties. So it's to produce a touch that starts and ends in rounds. Second thing is that the touch must be true, i.e. that there's no repetition of rows. Now, if you don't understand the terminology about a touch being true and about what I mean by a row, don't worry, because I'm just about to come on to that and explain some of the terminology, but it's an important feature of what a composer has to do. The touch that you compose must be of sufficient length. So you might just be composing a touch for practice night or Sunday morning, in which case it's probably going to be quite short. But if you're composing a quarter peal length, it's obviously got to be a touch of at least 1250 changes, and if you're composing a peal length, you've got to have 5,000 changes. So there's obviously these are different things that come into the way you actually approach what you're trying to do. The last thing I put down here is that the touch should ideally be musical. Now, what people regard as being musical in bell ringing is quite subjective, but there are sort of one or two common things that a lot of people do agree upon. And so it is always, again, it's something that it's good to bear in mind when you're doing your composing. Can I pack it with music if possible? My next question I'd like people to think about is, can I be a composer? So I would say yes, anyone can be a composer. You don't need to be an expert ringer. You don't need to be an expert conductor. You don't need to be a mathematician. I'm certainly not a mathematician, and it hasn't harmed my progress in composing. So what skills do I need then? Well, one big thing that I think you'll appreciate as we go through these slides is that you need to enjoy playing around with numbers, and you'll probably need lots and lots of paper and pens and pencils on which to write on those on the paper. I've probably over my lifetime produced loads and loads of piles of scrap paper with all sorts of scribbles on them. You also need to be prepared to spend plenty of time when you're composing, and this isn't something that's just sort of you can do 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. It's something that you need to sort of spend some concentrated time on. And the other thing you should do is spend time studying other people's compositions. Try and understand how they work, because it's very informative in your own learning experience to sort of look at other people's compositions, to see what they've done, and ideally see if you can do it better. So let's talk about some of the terminology that I'm going to be talking about in detail. The first one is rows. So change ringing, as it says here, it's a continuous process of transposing positions of adjacent bells. Sometimes you're just changing one pair at a time, sometimes you're changing several pairs at once. And every new transposition that you make produces a new row. And each row, when we're doing change ringing, each row we ring alternately at handstroke and backstroke. And every row will contain every bell once and only once. So just to go into a little bit more detail, here are some examples of rows. A few 6-bell rows to start with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a row on 6 bells. Obviously, it's one that we normally call rounds. Some other examples of rows on 6 bells: 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 5, 6, 4, 1, 2. Just to confirm the point that I said above, each row contains every bell once and only once, as you can see from those examples. And then down below, we've got some more examples of rows on 8 bells. Again, each bell occurs once in the row. So those are just sort of random rows that I picked out of the air. On the right-hand side now, we can see, look at a particular sequence of rows, which happens to be plain hunt on 4. So this sequence of rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, these are the rows that we actually ring when we're ringing plain hunt on 4. So 2, 1, 4, 3 is a hand stroke, 2, 4, 1, 3 is a backstroke, 4, 2, 3, 1 is the next hand stroke, etc., until we get back to rounds at the end of this sequence of rows. So that's what rows are all about. The next thing I want to talk about is leads. So a lead is a particular sequence of rows which is normally following a regular symmetrical pattern. Each row within that lead is derived from the previous row by transposing one or more adjacent pairs of bells. So we don't sort of have more random transpositions between one row and the next. It's only by swapping over pairs of adjacent bells. And then when we have a specific fixed sequence of rows, that's what we usually call a method. So on the left here, we see, as we saw on the previous slide, a lead of plain bob minimus. And we see pictured here the actual 8 rows that make up the lead, followed by the lead head of the next lead. Now, where I've just said lead head, we need to clarify here exactly what I mean by lead head and lead end. So lead head is the start of the lead, which is when the treble is doing its backstroke lead. The lead end is when the treble's gone up to the back and hunted back down to the front again. At its hand stroke, that row, in this example, 1, 3, 2, 4, that's the lead end. And then the backstroke is the next lead head. So that's the lead head of the next lead. Now, it's a very common thing for people to refer to talk about lead ends when they really mean lead heads. Now, I'm probably just as guilty of that as anybody. But as I go through the rest of this, you'll see that it's quite important that we get this terminology right. So the lead head is the backstroke that starts off the new lead. The lead end is the hand stroke at the very end of the lead. So here as well, we've got an example of a lead plucked out of the plain course of plain bob minor. This particular lead starts from the row 1, 3, 5, 2, 6, 4. So that's our lead head. We then go through the sequence of rows for plain bob minor. The treble gets back to the front. It's hand stroke lead again. That's the lead end. Backstroke is the new lead head. So we've got that group of rows that make up a lead. The next bit of terminology is a course. So when we have a sequence or a group of leads that are all rung one after the other, starting from one row and then finishing with the same row, that's what we call a course. And the number of leads within that course will be the number of working bells for that particular method. So what I mean by that is for plain bob minor, for example, we've got the treble that's hunting for every lead, but the other 5 bells are all doing different work in each lead. So they're working bells, 5 of those. So that means we have 5 leads in the course. You've probably all heard the terminology, the plain course. So the plain course is the course that always starts from rounds, but other courses will start from different rows. But they'll always start at the beginning of a lead, i.e. at a lead head, and the course will always return to the same row that you started from. So just looking here at the plain course for plain bob minor, and looking at how it's made up of a number of different leads. So as I said earlier, there'll be 5 leads in the course of plain bob minor. The first lead head is rounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first lead end we get to is 32546, and the next lead head starts from 135264. We do that 5 times, and at the end of it, we get back to rounds again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we started the course from rounds, and we got back to rounds by ringing 5 leads in succession. So that's the plain course, but looking at the concept of a different course, so as I mentioned above, different courses will start from different rows. So this course on the right hand side, this course starts from the row 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 6. But just like the plain course, it has the 5 leads in it. It has different lead heads and lead ends in it because we started from a different row. But at the end, we get back to 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 6 again. So that's a course. The last sort of little bit of terminology I just want to explain now is about truth, and also connected to this, the idea of what we call extents and also what we call proof. So any touch that we compose is said to be true if all the rows in that touch are different or they're unique. Now, the maximum number of different rows that we can get on any number bells, there's a sort of standard formula that we can use to actually calculate that, which is referred in mathematical terms is referred to as the factorial formula. But basically, to work it out, you as the example show here, on 4 bells, the actual maximum number of rows will be 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. On 6, it will be 6 times 4, 3, 2, 1, etc., etc. So we just got shown here just some examples of what the maximum rows are on some of the sets of bells going up to 8 anyway. So this is showing you what the maximum number of different rows you can get on any particular number of bells. And when you compose a touch which is shorter than the maximum possible, you're obviously going to be omitting some of those rows. That's fine, but the ones that you do ring must still all be different to make your touch true. Because if any rows are repeated at all in your touch, then we say the touch is false. And it only needs 1 repeated row for the touch to be false. You might have loads and loads of repeated rows, but that doesn't really matter. The fact that you've got 1 means it's false, and that touch is not valid. Now, for practice night or Sunday service touch, to be honest, it doesn't really matter if the touch that you ring is false. Although you might see some people giving you sort of a bit of a wink at the end of the touch to say, yeah, they've spotted it. They've spotted that you've called a false touch. For example, if you'd rung a touch on 8 bells and you've had the Queen's row twice, then somebody would probably have mentioned that. Somebody would have noticed that as we're going through it. And but because it's just a practice night or Sunday service touch, that's not really a problem. But if you're composing a quarter peal or a peal, then really, the touch must be true if you want your quarter peal or peal to be recognised as a proper performance. The process by which we check whether a touch is true or false, we call proof or proving. But there are a number of different techniques that we can use, which means we don't sort of have to manually go through every single row in our touch and check that they're all different. There's quite a few shortcuts that we can use to actually confirm whether our touch is true or not. Just a little aside at this point about truth on 6 bells or less. I've said, for example, that the maximum number of rows you can get on 6 is 720. That's the 6 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. But if we're ringing a quarter peal or a peal, we're obviously ringing more than 720 rows. So how can we say that the touch is true when we're clearly going to have to ring some of those rows more than once? Well, the convention is that on touches of 6 bells or less, your touch is still considered to be true if every different row occurs the same number of times in the touch overall. So what that means is, for a peal of doubles, for example, where you need to ring 5,040 changes, you can ring 42 separate touches, each of 120 rows, of 120 changes, rows. Each touch is true in that it contains every row once, but because you're ringing it 42 different touches, they might be it could be the same touch every time, but 42 touches, each of which contain every row once, that's fine because you're ringing every row 42 times. Similarly for minor, you can ring 7 lots of 720 to get your peel length of 5040. Again, you're ringing every row 7 times, no more, no less. Also, regarding truth on 6 bells or less, it's also permitted that you can omit some rows from one of your instances in order to achieve a shorter touch. So what I mean by that is that the number of occurrences of some of the rows can be one less than the other rows. So, for example, if you want to ring a quarter peal of Bob minor, one of the ways of doing that is to ring a touch of 720 rows that's got 720 that's got all the rows in it, but then you might add on to that another touch that's just got 540 rows on it to get up to 1260 altogether. That's still acceptable because you've rung all the changes once, but some of them you've rung twice. So I said so it can, it's still considered true if the number of occurrences of some of the rows is one less than the others. So you rung all of them at least once, but some of them you rung twice, that's acceptable. Similarly, for a quarter peal of Bob doubles, you could ring 10 true touches of 120 rows each, but then add a shorter true touch of 60 on the end to get up to your quarter peal length of 1260. So some of the rows you will have rung 10 times, but the ones that you rang in the touch of 60 at the end, the extra ones, you'll have rung all those 11 times in total. So that's fine. If, for example, though, you're trying to say ring a quarter peal for somebody's special 80th anniversary, and you'd like to ring a quarter peal length of Bob doubles of 1280, you might think, well, one way of doing that is for me to ring my 10 120s, so that's 10 occurrences of every row, so that's fine. The plain course of Bob doubles has got 40 rows, so perhaps I could just ring 2 plain courses on top of my 12, so on top of my 10 120s to get me a total length of 1280. However, that's not really acceptable. We would classify that as false because some of the rows we will have rung 12 times. So the 2 extra plain courses that we ran at the end, the rows in the plain course will have all been rung 12 times, but there'll be another 80 rows that will have only been rung 10 times. That means that touch would have to be classified as false. The other special thing about touches on 6 bells or less is that you can ring multi-extent touches, which don't have to be made up of consecutive true extents. So, for example, if you want to ring a touch of 240 of doubles, you could either ring 2 true 120s, one after the other, or you could just ring a touch in which each of 120 rows occurs twice. So, for example, in the first 120 rows of your touch, you might not come back to rounds at all in those 120 rows, but if you did that, then rounds would have to appear twice in the second half, in the second 120 rows of your touch, for it to be considered true, because you've got to ring each row the same number of times, but you can do it within the block. It doesn't have to be just in the block as a whole. You've rung every row the same number of times. Before I move on, Arthur, are there any sort of particular questions that you might want to point out at this stage?
Nothing's coming in the chat box, but if we just pause a couple of seconds, if anyone has anything, either scribble in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask it, now would be a good time. We've still got people coming in, John. We've got 62 now. Wonderful.
Right, I'll move on then.
Perfect. Thank you.
So a bit more detail on rows now, and we're going to talk about the nature of rows. Now, what do I mean by the nature of rows? I mean that all rows are positive or negative. Now, what do I mean by that? Rounds is always positive. And then now other rows are considered positive or negative depending on how many swaps of pairs of bells you need to convert the row back to rounds. Now, when you're making those swaps, you're not confined to swapping adjacent pairs of bells like you would when you're actually ringing and you're moving from one row to another. Basically, the rule is that if the number of swaps that you have to make to get your row back to rounds is an even number of swaps, then the row is positive. But if the number of swaps is odd, then the row is negative. And as we'll see, half of all the possible rows are positive, the other half are all negative. To look at some detailed examples to understand this a bit better, looking at some rows on 5 bells. So we first we're looking at the row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So to determine whether it's positive or negative, we're working out how many swaps we need to do to get it back to rounds. This one, it's already in rounds, so we haven't got to do any swaps. And as I said earlier, round is always positive. Looking at the next example here, row 1, 2, 4, 3, 5. To get that back to rounds, we've got to swap over 4 and 3. So we've made one swap. 1 is an odd number, therefore this row is negative. Next example, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3. To get that one back to rounds, we can swap over 1 and 2, and then 5 and 3. As I said earlier, it doesn't have to be adjacent pairs that we're swapping over. But we've managed to get back to rounds with 2 swaps. That's an even number, so this one's positive. Next one, 4, 5, 1, 3, 2. As it shows in the table there, we have to make 3 swaps to get that one back to rounds, so that one's negative. And then a couple of 6 bell rows down the bottom, examples. 6, 5, 3, 4, 2, 1. We can get that one back to rounds by swapping 1 and 6 and then 2 and 5. So even number of swaps, therefore it's positive. The last one, this time we actually have to make 5 swaps to get this one back to rounds. But it's 5, so it's an odd number, therefore it's negative. So the fact whether a row is positive or negative is pretty important when we're doing composing, as you'll see as we go on. So just having a look at a bit of a more detailed example of that by looking at plain Hunt on 4. So in this table, in the 3rd column, the one that's titled headed row, we've basically got here all the rows of that we ring in a lead of plain Hunt on 4. The column next to it, swaps from preceding row, is basically showing us the number of swaps that we've made from the previous row to get our new row. So, for example, to get from row number 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, to row number 2, 2, 1, 4, 3, we've had to swap over the red pair, 1 and 2, and the blue pair, 3 and 4, to get to 2, 1, 4, 3. So we've made 2 swaps. The next column along is effectively a tally of how many swaps we've made so far from rounds to get to this point where we are now. Because the total number of swaps that we've made from rounds after row 2 is 2, that means that row must be positive. So in the right-hand column, you can see that the second row is positive, just like rounds was positive. When we move from row 2 to row 3, this time it's the green pair, 1, 4, that are swapping over to get us to 2, 4, 1, 3. So we've only made 1 swap in this instance. If we add that 1 onto the 2 swaps that we'd already made, we get a total of 3 swaps so far from rounds. That's an odd number, therefore row number 3, 2, 4, 1, 3 is negative. So we go through that process all the way through the different rows of plain Hunt on 4, just to show you an examples of how you can see where rows are positive and negative depending on what the total number of swaps has been from rounds as we're going along. Now there is a slightly quicker way of doing it if you like. which doesn't involve keeping this tally of the total swaps from rounds. What you can do instead is determine the nature of your new row based on the nature of the previous row and how many swaps you've had to make to get to the new row. So what I mean by that is, for example, row 2 was 2143, and we know that that row was positive. To get to 2413, we've had to make one swap. We know that the previous row to be positive a positive row must have involved having an even number of swaps. So when we add 1 on for our new row, we've now got an odd number of swaps. So this new row must be negative. So we haven't sort of been keeping a tally of the fact that it's 3 altogether. We're just saying the previous one was positive. I'm adding an odd number onto it. Therefore, I must be changing the nature of the next rows, and the nature row has got to be opposite to what the previous one was, because I'm either going, because certainly in this instance, I'm going from an odd number of swaps, sorry, an even number of swaps to an odd number of swaps. Looking at a different example, on row 4, for example, row 4231, the way that we then move on to 4321. So 4231 we see was from the right-hand column was a negative row. This time we've made one swap again, which means we must, because the previous row was negative, that must have involved an odd number of swaps. We've added 1, so we must now be on an even number of swaps. So this new row must be positive. I'm conscious I probably might not have explained that very well, but it basically, if you understand that the total number of swaps, if it's an even number, then your row is positive. If it's an odd number, then your row is negative. But you say you don't have to keep that total sort of tally going all the way through. You can just do it from knowing what the previous row was, whether that was positive or negative, and then adding on your new number of swaps. Now, sort of transfer that from just a leader plain hunt into a leader Bob minimus. So this table is very similar to the one before. So we've got the rows and we've got the nature of each row, whether it's plus or minus, positive or negative. But what I've now done is I've added a new column on the right-hand side, which I've called a key. This key, I'm basically derived a key for each row, and this key is made up of the position of the treble within that row, followed by the nature of that row. So my key for row number is a 1 because the treble is in position 1, and the nature of that row is positive, so the key for that row is 1 plus. Next row, row 2, my key for that row will be start with a 2 because the treble is in second place. It has the plus nature added onto it, so the key for that row is 2 plus. We do that for basically all the rows within this lead of plain Bob minimus. So we've got a key for each of the 8 rows within the lead. And one of the things that's important to notice at this point is that every one of those keys is different. They're all unique. Down the bottom of this of this screen, I've basically put a table together where the column headers are each of those 8 different keys, and the second row of the table shows you all the actual rows that we've rung within this first lead of plain Bob minimus. So under the 1 plus, the actual row that we rang was 1, 2, 3, 4. Then going across, the actual row that we rang for the key 2 plus was 2, 1, 4, 3, etc., etc. For each of these 8 keys, though, there are actually 3 possible different options. So for the 1 plus key, the row that we actually rang in this leader Bob minimus was 1, 2, 3, 4. But there are 2 other rows which would also have that same key, but which we haven't actually rung within this leader Bob minimus. In order for us to ring all the possible changes on 4 bells, we need to be able to get to ring all these other variations of the keys. So each one of these keys has got 3 possible values, and And we need to be able to ring all of those to get to a touch that has all the 24 rows of plain Bob minimus in them. So the way that we can actually do that is effectively what plain Bob minimus is, because what happens at the lead end of Bob minimus, so row 8, which is 1, 3, 2, 4 on this example, in the orange lead on the left, which is the first lead of Bob minimus, at the lead end, the next row, which is the lead head of the second lead, the blue lead, is 1, 3, 4, 2, because instead of just plain hunting, which would have brought us 1, 2, 3, 4, there's the 3 has made seconds over the treble. So our new lead head for the second row is 1, 3, 4, 2. When we get to the end of we go through the same pattern of changing pairs of bells as we did in the first lead. When we get to the lead end of the second lead, row 16, 1, 4, 3, 2. This time it's the 4, which makes seconds over the treble. So our new lead head for the third lead, 1, 4, 2, 3. We go through that, and at the end of the third lead end 1, 2, 4, 3. The 2 makes seconds. We come back to 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're back to the beginning of the course again. But what we've basically done here is gone through all the different permutations of each key. So in the table at the bottom again, we're going repeated. So these are the 8 different keys and what all the different permutations are for each of those keys. And you can see, for example, if we look across, say, just picking at random, the 4 minus key. So down the bottom, you see that that's the rows that have that key, 4 minus, are 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 3, 4, 2, 1. But if we actually look at the leads above and look at rows 4, 12, and 20, we can see that we've actually rung all those different rows that belong to that group, the 4 minus group. So by doing that, we've managed to ring all the different 24 unique rows of minimus. A sentence at the bottom of this screen, which is pretty important. If you've got a set of rows like we had here in Plain Hunt, which all have unique keys, then if you start that set of rows from a different value for the initial key, you will never get any duplicated rows. So what I mean is that so we started from the leader plain hunt, which started from row 1, 2, 3, 4. If we start from the lead, that same lead, but from the different permutations of the 1 plus key, so from 1, 3, 4, 2, 1, 4, 2, 3, because all our keys were unique to start with, all the actual rows that we ring in the second and third leads are guaranteed to be different to the first lead. Next, look at how this applies to Bob doubles. We've done the sort of same thing here, same sort of thing here. So we've got all the 4 leads of the course of Bob doubles shown here, and against each one we've put the plus or minus to show whether it's positive or negative. Something a little bit odd about Bob doubles is that you'll see that in the first lead, rows 1 to 10, all the rows are positive. That's because every row is generated from the previous one by swapping 2 pairs. So it's always an even number that's being swapped, so that they're all positive until you get to the lead end 1, 3, 2, 5, 4, and then in Bob doubles the next row is generated just by swapping over 5 and 2. They do a 3, 4 dodge. So because we've just swapped over 1 pair, that means our new lead head at row 11 is now negative. So Bob doubles is quite unusual in that alternate leads are either all positive rows or all negative rows. Again, as I did for Bob minimus, I put a key on the right-hand side for each row, the same as before, made up of the position of the treble and the nature of that row. But you'll see that now the keys that I've got are not unique. There's lots of duplications. So, for example, rows 1 and 10, they're both 1 plus. Rows 21 and 30 are also 1 plus. So we've basically got four occurrences of each key. So what we need to do is change how we work out our keys. So on this version, you see I've generated a different key. Now this key involves the position of the 5th in the bell number 5 in the row as well. So for rounds, my key is 1-5 plus. So that's with the treble in first place, the 5 is in 5th place, and the nature of the row is positive. So that gives me my 1-5 plus. The next row, the treble is in 2nd place, so 2, the 5th is in 5th place, so 5, and then the nature is plus, so we've got 2-5. With these new set of keys, they're now all unique. They're all different. In the table at the bottom, I've just pulled out all the keys that start with the 1. So these are basically all the ones where the treble is leading. And again, just thought about what are the other rows going to be, which will also have this same key. Looking at 1-5 plus specifically, so in the plain course that we're looking at here, that was rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the other members of that particular group, the 1-5 plus group, would be 1, 4, 2, 3, 5 and 1, 3, 4, 2, 5. And we can get to those other groups by effectively calling a bob at the end of the course. So right at the end, where we've got to row 40, row 1, 2, 4, 3, 5. If we didn't call a bob, we'd just get back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds again, but we do call a bob. That makes the next row that we come up with 1, 4, 2, 3, 5, which is our new lead head, which, as you see from the table down the bottom, that's the second occurrence within the 1-5 plus group. We then ring the whole course starting from that 1, 4, 2, 3, 5, and because of what I mentioned a couple of screens ago, we can be guaranteed that all the rows in this particular course, starting from 1, 2, 4, 2, 3, 5, none of them will duplicate what we rang in the first course. And the same will apply when we get to the end of the 4, 2, 3, 5, 1, 4, 2, 3, 5 course. We call another bob, which moves us to the 1, 3, 4, 2, 5 course. And again, all the rows within that course are all going to be different. So each one of the courses has given us 40 unique rows, 3 40s, 120. That's the maximum number of rows on 5. So that's how we sort of, with bob doubles, for example, as our example, that's how we get to ring all the 120 rows, and we can sort of understand how we've got there, and that all our rows are going to be unique. Now let's move on to bob minor and go through a very similar exercise. So these are the 5 leads of the plain course of bob minor, and again we've generated a key for each row. This time my key is made up of the positions of the treble, the 5th and the 6th, and the nature of the row. So for rounds, row number 1, our key is 1 for the treble in first place, 5 for the 5 in 5th place, and 6 for the 6 in 6th place, followed by the nature, so 1, 5, 6 plus. So that's how I've generated all these keys for bob minor. And like the sort of keys we've been looking at before, if you were to check through all these different keys from the plain course, you will find that they're all different, they're all unique. Again, down the bottom, I've just shown you just the keys that start with the 1s, so all the ones where the treble's leading. And again, each one of these keys has got 3 different values, potential values. So if we ring the plain course, if we bring a course starting from the second possible option for 1, 5, 6 plus, i.e. from 1, 4, 2, 3, 5, 6 plus, 1, 4, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then again from 1, 3, 4, 2, 5, 6, we're going to get a different set of rows to what we had in the plain course. So we've now got 3 sets of rows. The plain course bob minor has 60 rows on it, so we've got 3 lots of 60, so we've got 180 different rows. However, on 6 bells, there are actually 720 different rows, so we've only got a quarter of them so far. How do we start getting the rest of them? Well, one thing to notice that in this table at the bottom, you notice that all the keys that I've listed there, they're all positive. So that means that in the plain course, all the rows when the treble is at lead are all positive. So we want to get some of the negative ones as well, as if we're going to get all the possible 720 rows. So the way to do that is to ring an alternative course, but where we start from a row where the key will be 156 minus. So the way we do that, the most simple way to do that is, for example, to swap over the 3 and 4, as I've done here. So if we ring the course above minus starting from 124356 with a key of 156 minus, that gives us a whole set of new keys. And in fact, it gives us 60 new keys, none of which were featured in our previous 60 keys. And so each of these keys has also got 3 possible values. So we've got another 180 to add on to our previous 180 rows. So now we've got up to 360 different rows, which we can get to, starting from the 3 different options of 156 plus and the 3 different options of 156 minus. So just looking then at this table, which gives us a summary of all those keys that we've used so far. The table at the bottom shows what all the possible keys are, and kind of obviously the ones that are not ticked are the ones that we haven't actually found so far in the courses that we've used so far. So what we need to find courses which are going to give us these missing keys. I've highlighted in particular a couple, the ones that are highlighted in pink, because these are the ones that I'm going to use to find the missing keys that we haven't got yet. So a 126 plus course, the first one I've highlighted in pink there. So a row that would have that key, for example, would be 154326, i.e. the 1 is in first place, the 5 is in second place, the 6 is in sixth place, and it's a positive row. So that's 154326 meets that criteria. So here is the course of minus starting from 154326. That gives us another unique set of 60 keys, which will all go around 3 times. That gives us another 180 rows to add on to the 360 we already had. And again, you see it in the table at the bottom, all the keys were positive. We want to get all the negative versions of those as well. So we start from a course to achieve that begins with a row 153426. So this row is negative, because to get back to rounds, you just swap over 2 and 5, for example. But this course will give us a further 60 unique keys on top of all the ones that we had before, each of which goes 3 times. This is another 180 rows on top of what we had before. We've now got to 720 rows altogether. So just to sort of recap on that, the maximum number of rows for Bob Miner is 720, and as I've said earlier, half of all rows are positive, half are negative, but we can get to ring all those rows by ringing all the rows within each of the following, each of the courses that are listed there. So if we've got 2 columns here, so these are basically the rows that you would start your course from. All the rows that are positive that we start from, it's a new bit of terminology here. We refer to those as in-course rows. In the left-hand column. In the right-hand column, these are the ones that started from negative rows. So we refer to those as out-of-course courses. But if we ring those 12 courses of Bob Miner starting from each of those 12 different rows, we will find that the rows that we ring in all of those courses, they're all different, and that will give us all the 720 possible rows.
Sure. Sorry, just before you move on, we had a quick question in the chat box. Why on double did you pick 15 for the key, and why on minor 156?
Really, because I'm just trying to generate a key that I know is going to be unique. So if, for example, on minor, I just used 1 6 as my key, 1 and 6 as my key, that wouldn't have been unique. I go back to this plain course here. So if I just done 1 and 6, for example, then the key for rounds, row number 1, would have been 16 plus, but the key for row number 12 would also have been 16 plus. And I wanted to make sure that I got a unique key for each row. So that's why I've added in another bell into my key, in this case the 5. The important thing is to come up with a key that's going to be unique. So that's why I've had to add an extra one in for minor. Hopefully that explains that.
Definitely, if you want to add anything, just to unmute yourself quickly now. There's a little bit more in the chat box, but I think that's probably relevant for at the end. So I think.
Yep.
Thank you.
What we can do with all that information that we've now learned is generate this table, which we see here. Now, these are down the left-hand side. We've got all the 12 course heads, which I mentioned on the previous screen. Now you'll notice now that I've dropped the 1 off the front of all of these course heads and lead heads. This is what a convention that is normally made, because every single one of these course heads and lead heads starts with a 1. So it just we don't bother to write it down. In this table, so we've got each of the 12 courses, and what I've also shown in this table are all the different lead heads and lead ends that would occur within that course for Bob Minor. One important thing to realise is that any lead within a course can be rung forwards or backwards. So I've just picked out one particular lead here from the plain course of Bob Minor, the one that starts from 156342 with the lead head and ends with lead end 165432. What we can do is basically turn that on its head and use 165432 as our lead head instead. And our original lead head 156342 becomes our lead end instead. We're basically running exactly the same rows, but we've just rung them backwards. So that's something that is very common in touches of minor, that some leads in your course you will ring forwards and some you will ring backwards. What I want to now is look at how you actually use that in practice to compose a touch. So now we're going to do our first little bit of composing. We're going to compose a touch of Bob Minor. So what I've done is color code each course here, and you'll see why in just a moment. But what we need to understand is how we move, how a plain lead, how we move from sort of one lead head to the next lead head, depending whether it's a plain lead, a Bob lead, or a single lead. And in the middle here, I'm showing that what actually happens in Bob Minor. At the first lead end, the handstroke row is 32546, and if it's a plain lead, then your next row is 135264. For a Bob, it's 23564, and for a single, it would be 32564. So what we need to do when we're composing our touch is use those transpositions to work out what our next lead head is going to be. So on the right, we see a touch, just 108 Bob Minor. To just explain what's going on in this table. So we're starting from the lead head 23456, and at the first lead end, there is no call. So the transposition that we need to make to work out what the new lead head is going to be is, as per the details in the middle, is this 135264 transposition. I'm dropping the ones again on the right hand side, as I mentioned. That's quite common for us to do that. So our new lead head in this case is 35264. That's the transposition that we've had to make from the previous lead head 23456. Our next lead is going to be a Bob. So this dash here is this common notation for a Bob. So we're going to have a Bob. The transposition that we need to make, say according to the table in the middle, is 23564. So we apply that transposition to our previous lead head. So what I mean by that is that the bells that were in seconds and thirds positions stay there, but the bells that were in fourths, fifths, and sixths rotate round. So the lead previously 35264 becomes 35642 as our next lead head. We basically follow that process through the whole of the touch, depending on whether our call is a Bob or a single, or whether it's a plain lead. We make the appropriate transposition to come up with our new lead head, and hopefully at the end of our touch, if it's going to be a proper touch, it will come back to rounds at the end, as this one does. So we come back to lead head 23456 at the end of the touch. What we then need to do is check whether we've managed to produce a true touch. Now, coding, will help with this. So what I've done is we've basically got to match up these lead heads that we've generated with our lead heads and lead ends in the table on the left. And so each time we ring one of these lead heads, we cross it off in the table on the left. So within this touch, you can see the lead heads that are all in red, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3, 5, 2, 6, 4, 4, 2, 6, 3, 5, they all come from the course head 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I can basically, I've struck out those leads to show that I've rung them, and just to make sure that I don't accidentally come back and ring them again, in which case my touch will be false. I've done then the same with all the other leads in heads. So the pink lead heads here come from the pink course, etc. The greens ones come from the green course. So for each one of the leads, I've checked it on the left table on the left, crossed it off as I'm going along to make sure I don't use any of them more than once. In this case, I haven't, therefore my touch is true. And as a bonus, my touch has actually got queens and titums in it, if you look closely. Here's another touch that I've applied. We basically applied the same logic to. This one is a longer touch and it doesn't have any singles in it, just bobs, but I've basically gone through the same exercise of transposing each new lead head from the previous one based on whether it's a bob lead or a plain lead, working out what the new lead head is. And I've looked at this touch and I can see that all my lead heads here, they're all different. So hopefully my touch is going to be true. I then go through my exercise of ticking them all off in the table on the left. And as I work my way through, I'm actually going fine until I get to this lead head here, 5, 3, 4, 6, 2, at the beginning of the second pink block. Because when I go to try and cross that off in my table on the left, it's already crossed off. That's because I'm attempting to ring this lead here, the one that goes from 35642 to 53462. I'm attempting to ring it backwards, but actually I've already rung it forwards earlier on in the touch up here, 35642. So that was where I'd actually crossed it out earlier when I rang this lead 35642. So I can't ring both the lead heads starting from 53462 and 35642 because they've both got the same rows in. That means this touch is false. This next screen shows you a way of achieving all 720 rows, so the whole extent. More color coding here, so there's a different color for each course. But what you can do as an exercise is track through all the different lead heads for this particular sequence of bobs, singles, and plains, and you will find that every one of the lead heads that are in this touch are all different. Therefore, so when you go to try and check them all in the left-hand table, you'll find that you use each one once and once only. Therefore, the touch is true. And here's another example. Same thing. This one splits the courses up a bit more, so you'll see that the pink course, for example, is a single lead of it rung fairly on in the touch, but then later in the touch, you ring the other 4 leads. But in total, throughout the whole of the touch, you've rung every lead once and once only, so it's going to be true. Just a little bit about composition notation. So that on the left, we see the touch as I showed on the previous screen. So it's all written out by every single lead head. But we have the convention that when a call is made when the tenor is dodging 5/6 up, so it becomes 5th place spell at the new lead head, we call that the wrong position. And when the tenor is dodging 5/6 down at a call, so it's going to be in 6th place at the new lead head, that's referred to as the home position. So that touch that's on the left, we can basically describe that in a different way, as I have in the table in the middle. So we've got columns here. W is for wrong, H is for home. The third column tells us what the course head that we're starting from. In the first course, shows that we're going to have a bob. The dash means a bob at the wrong position. And at the end of the course, so when the tenor comes back to 6th place, the new course head is 52436. So that's the end of the light blue section in the touch as it's shown on the left. The next course has a single when the tenor's dodging 5/6 up in the wrong position. At the end of that course, we end up with a new course head of 3, 2, 4, 5, 6. So we basically carry on that sequence, and we notice it in the fourth course, as well as a single at the wrong position. We've also got a bob at home, and our new course head at that point is 4, 2, 3, 5, 6. So the middle, so the example in the middle is a shorter way of writing out a touch on the left. So we're not writing out all the individual lead heads. But then on the top right, we've got an even shorter way of describing this 720, just effectively in just a couple of lines. So we've just got the number 4 under the wrong position. Just a little note underneath saying that what I mean by 4. That means I'm going to call a bob, a single, a bob, a single. So consecutively at each different wrong position. So that will be across 4 different courses. And then in the last of those 4 courses, I'm also calling a bob at home. That brings up course head 4, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then I just say repeat twice, because it's the remaining 8 courses of the touch are basically the same calling as the first 4 courses. So I can just say repeat twice. So that's a nice short, neat way of describing that particular touch. Right, we're now moving on to bob major, and I'm a bit conscious that time's getting on a bit. So I'll try not to take too long on this. Bob major, so we're doing exactly the same sort of thing that we did for bob minor. We're looking at all the rows in the plain course. I've just got the first 4 printed here just to save space. We're generating a key again. This time the key that we're going to use is the positions of the 1, the 7, and the 8 in the row, again followed by the nature. So that means the key for rounds is 178 plus. So we were talking about keys earlier. The main point with this key is to make sure that it's unique. And in the plain course of bob major, that key with looking at the positions of 178 and the nature, it is unique. So all 112 keys that you get for playing a course of plain bob major, they are all unique. So if we just think about how many different options are there going to be in the group that have the key 178 plus. Now all the sort of keys that we're looking before just only had 3 options in each group, but this time there are going to be far more options for rows that have the key 178 plus, because they're in positions 2 to 6. We've got a lot more different options. How many options are there? Well, we've got 5 slots here to fill. We know that actually from what we were looking for, what we looked before at on extensive doubles, that on 5 bells, the maximum number of rows you can get is 120. But remember that half of them are positive and half of them are negative. And for this key, we only want the positive ones, excuse me. So that means there are 60. So half of the 120, there are 60 different options for this key 178 plus. That's going to say, so that gives us 60 different options. The plain course of bob major is 112 rows, so 60 courses, that's a total of 6,720 rows altogether, so plenty of scope for appeal, where we only need 5,000 rows. What we would tend to do though is also, when we're looking at composing appeal, use the courses that start with a row that's got the key 178 minus as well. If we start, for example, from the row 1, 2, 4, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, which because it's got 1 swap from rounds is a negative row, we'll find that the 112 keys that we get for that course, again, they're all unique and they are all different to the keys that we had from the 178 plus course. Again, we'll find that there are 60 different options for that key 178 minus, so that gives us another 60 different courses we can use. So we've got 120 courses now altogether. That gives us 13,444 rows to choose from our appeal. So plenty to choose from for composing appeal. And just listed on the right hand side, these are all those different 60 options for the 178 plus key on the left and the 178 minus key on the right. By convention, I've missed out the 1 and the 7 and the 8 because they would be the same on every single row. When we just look at the actual 5 bits of that row that change. So we've got 120 different courses that we can use to generate a peeler Bob Major. In Bob Major, we have calls that we refer to like Bob Minor as wrong and home. In Bob Major, wrong is when the when the tenor is dodging 7/8 up and it becomes 7th place spell at the new lead head, and home is at the end of the course when it's dodging 7/8 down and it becomes 8th place at the new lead head. In Bob Major, we also have calls at what we call the middle position when the treble is dodging, when the tenor is dodging 5/6 down, and we also have calls at the before position. Now, before is when the tenor would have been making seconds over the treble. You call a bob and it actually runs out. In Bob Major, that means that you actually ring the previous. You'd start at the beginning of that lead head. You were 3rd place spelled. You would have made seconds over the treble, but there's a bob, so you run out and you ring 3rd place spell again. So the effect of a before is actually for the tenor bell, which has run out of that bob, is to actually go back and repeat that lead again, that 3rd place bell lead again, which is so that's a different sort of calling position, which is going to give us a few more options when we come to generating our composition. What we do when we're looking at composing and proving touches on 8, we do it slightly differently to on 6. So on 6, we had to look at all the individual leads and check them all individually. But when we're composing on 8, we don't look at every individual lead. We look at effectively the new course heads that each call moves us into. So what I mean by that is down on the left hand side here, we can see different transpositions that happen when you call a bob or a single at each one of these different positions in the course. So if we call a bob at the wrong position when the tenor's dodging 7/8 up, that will move us. If we were ringing the plain course 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that will actually move us, and we'd now be moved into the course 5, 2, 4, 3, 6. So bells in the positions 2, 3, and 5 have moved around. So we basically move that. The effect of that bob is to move us into a different course. If we call a single, again, that moves us to the course 5, 3, 4, 2, 6. So that's just swapped over 2 and 5 in this instance. Now a single would always move us from a positive course head into a negative course head. And if you're already in a negative course head, a single will change you back to a positive course head, because a single involves a different number of swaps to what the bob would have. So it changes the nature of the rows. So we have that transposition for a wrong. We have different transpositions for befores, middles, and homes, which are all listed down there. So these are all transpositions that you have to make to the course that you were in to find out what new course head you're in after having made that call. So looking at a short touch here, a Bob Major, and how that sort of all works. So we're starting from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and our first call that we make is at the wrong position, and it's a bob. So according to the table down the left-hand corner, that means we need to make the transposition 5, 2, 4, 3, 6 to our course head. We make that transposition to the course we were currently in, which was the plain course. So we end up with 5, 2, 4, 3, 6. The next call is at the middle position. The table down the left says the transposition for that on our course head will be the 4, 3, 6, 5, 2 transposition. So that means the bell that was in 4th place goes to 2nd place. The bell that was in 6th place goes to 4th place. The bell that was in 2nd place bell goes to 6th place. So we apply that transposition to the course head that we were in, 5, 2, 4, 3, 6, and we end up with a new course head of 4, 2, 6, 3, 5. So that's the one that we've moved to. So we do that for each of the different calls in our touch. So this particular touch then has a home, a wrong, a before, a single middle, and a single home. We go through all those different transpositions, and we find that at the end we've got back to course head 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've managed to find a touch that has started and ended in rounds. We're not sure at this point whether it's true or not, but at least we've managed to get a touch that comes round at the end. The common notation then to actually describe that particular touch is what's in the bottom left of the screen. So again, we've got headings for each of W for wrong, B before, M for middle, H for home. Each line within that table shows what calls are made and what the resulting course head is. So the first course has calls at wrong, Bob's, but wrong, middle, and home, and the course head that we end up at the end of all that is 64235. The second course has calls at wrong before, single middle, single home, and brings us back to a course head of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's the common notation that we would use. Now I want to just do an exercise of trying to compose a peal of Bob Major. And what I'm going to do with this is just restrict myself to not having any singles, because just imagine I'm trying to produce this for a conductor who's maybe reasonably novice, or a band that's reasonably novice, and they'd rather not be bringing singles. So I'm just going to have Bobs, which means I'm restricted to the 60 in-course course heads. So I've got 60 courses to play with. But I've worked out that for a peal, I need to ring 45 courses for playing Bob Major. 45 times 112, which is the number of rows in a playing course, gives me 5,040. So what I've tried to do here is I've recognised that 45 is nicely divisible by 5. So it would be nice if I could come up with a calling that would repeat, that would go around 5 times. So it would be easier for the person who's conducting this to learn. So they've just got to ring something that goes around 5 times. So I've on the left, in the middle line there, I've managed to produce a touch by a number of combinations of calls at wrong, middle, and home, which comes up with a course head at the end, 42635, which I have managed to calculate is going to repeat 5 times. So if I make that same transposition from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 42635, I make that same transposition against 42635, I come up with a new course head for the next part end of 64523. So I would basically go through that and end up with something that repeats 5 times. So I've got something that I got here that looks like a potential peal composition. If I checked through all my course heads that I've generated there, they're all different. So hopefully this is going to be true. To be absolutely certain that it is true, what I need to do is what I've done in the table on the right-hand side, is go through each of the positions as I'm running through this touch, and just write down which course head it's moved, which course head I've gone to as a result of that particular calling. So what I mean by that is, so I've got columns wrong for when I could become 7th space spell, M for middle for when I become 6th space spell, H for home for when I become 8th space spell, and for each course I've written what new course head I come into at that position. So the first row here, I'm starting from rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For my first wrong moves me into 5, 2, 4, 3, 6. Then I have a middle moving me 4, 2, 3, 5. Then I have a home that moves me to 6, 4, 2, 3, 5. And I basically do that for the whole of my touch. And where there is no call at any particular position, I just basically carry on, just repeat the course that I was already in. So in the second course, there is no calls at wrong or middle, therefore I continue writing down here 6, 4, 2, 3, 5. So that was the course that I was in at the end of the previous course. To actually, in theory, then I should do that for the whole of my touch and write that all out. And to guarantee that my touch is true, I just need to make sure that I don't have any repetitions at all in any of my columns. So I can do a bit of a shortcut on this because this is a 5-part calling. I can see that each part has got a different bell in 6th place at the end of the part. So the first part has the 5 in 6th place at the end. The next part has a 3 at the end. The next part will have the 2 in 6th place. The next part will have the 4 in 6th place. So because they're all different, what I can do as a shortcut is just check the columns for just one particular bell in 6th place. So what I've done on the right-hand side here is just check the ones that all have the 5 in 6th place. Because basically, if I can work out that it's all these courses are true with a 5 in 6th place, then it means that all the other courses, all the other parts of this composition of this touch will also be true because they all have a different bell in 6th place. When I do this check, so I need to check, say all the options, all what I've written down in each of the columns, just make sure that they're all unique, just to make sure that my touch is true. When I check, unfortunately, in this column, this wrong column here, I've got 3, 4, 6, 2, 5 twice. I've got it here, and then I've got it again down here. So unfortunately, my composition is false. I need to have another go. Down the bottom, I've got a slightly different variation on what I had above. It's pretty similar, but it's slightly different. When I go through exactly the same exercise as above, in my table on the right-hand side, check all my columns. Are they all unique? This time, yep, they are all unique. So this is going to be a true 5-part peel. This particular screen looks at a different composition using befores rather than middles. I think because of time, I will skip through this. But you say I'm sure you'll be able to get hold of these slides afterwards and go through these yourself if you like. But again, we had an example there of a false and a true composition. I would like to just cover this particular screen here to do with composition notation, because there are 2 different ways that compositions tend to get written out. The top version seems to be more logical. So this 5-1-20 composition, for example, the notation here is trying to tell you that so you're starting from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you will call a bob at before and then 2 bobs at home, which will bring you to a new course head of 5, 2, 3, 6, 4. Then you'll ring a bob at wrong and 3 bobs at home, which will generate a new course head of 6, 5, 3, 2, 4. Most often when you see compositions written out, they're not actually written out like that. The course heads are written at the beginning as the first column rather than the last column, which seems a bit nonsensical, but it just means you have to read it in a slightly different way. So at the bottom left example, you need to read this one as saying, I'm going to get to course 52364, but to get there, I'm going to call a before and 2 homes. Then I'm going to get to course 65324, but to get there, I'm going to call a wrong and 3 homes. So that's just 2 different ways of looking at it. My plan now is to move on to trouble dodging stuff. I don't know, Arthur, whether this might actually be a suitable point at which to pause, because I know time's getting on a bit, and maybe I can skip these and actually just move to the end if that would make sense. Don't know what you think.
Yes, there's a couple of things in the chat box as well. So we can always invite you back for composing stage 2 if you'd be prepared to, if people thought that was a good thing to do, and if that's okay with you, John.
Yep. What I will do is I will just skip to the end, so they're not having to sit there listening for too much longer. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second.
Yeah, I think we've had a comment, and I think this worked really well actually. Julia's just said she'd like to rewatch the video as I get a bit lost before getting more complicated, and then hopefully if you'll happily come back, John, we can give people a chance to watch the video and think about things, and then be a good chance to come back and review it. Just whilst John's looking at the screen, just so people are aware, because John has generously allowed us to record the video, what we will do is upload it to the Guild website. So if you, it'll probably be tomorrow now, but if you go onto the St. Martin's Guild website and go into the top training resource section, then you'll be able to view the slides and this video. And I think I certainly will be going back over it and pausing in lots of places to really think about things carefully. But that's open to everyone. I'll also make sure that Steph has the link so she can send it to people as well. I've noticed that sort of Richard Bimpton had to leave early and requested the link. So that's open to everyone, but just on the Guild website in the education section and training resources.
Sorry, I was just having some problems being able to share the right screen. Right, I think I've got that. Right, close. So just to consider some questions. So what do I need to do if I want to get started in composing? So some suggestions for what to think about. So start playing around with touches of Bob Minor. Hopefully the information that we covered today, you should be able to work out how to compose touches of Bob Minor and also how to prove them to make sure that they're true. Suggest then that you experiment with other plain minor methods as well that have got different lead end orders, for example, St. Clements, and see how that sort of changes things around. Then try a hand at Bob Major. Keep things simple to start with, and certainly recommend study other people's compositions, work out how they work, because you'll learn a lot from looking at other people's compositions. This what I'm describing here is effectively the way that I started out when I first started out composing, which was as a teenager. Here is you might recognize this as basically as a school workbook, which is one that I started off in my teenage years when I first got it started getting interested in composing. As you can see, my book is a little bit tattered now because this was quite a while ago. And just as an example here were the first 2 pages where I was writing out lots of different touches of Bob doubles and Bob Minor. So as I was writing these out, I was making sure that I understood them all. And some of the ones of Bob Minor here were ones that I'd sort of worked out for myself as I was going through this. Other ones was basically where I was studying what other people had already done, and writing them down and sort of getting to understand them. I just wanted to cover the question, should I use a computer to prove my compositions? Well, I would say yes, but only after you've satisfied yourself of truth by hand. So we've gone through examples of how to prove touches of Bob Minor and prove touches of Bob Major. Do it by hand first, but then by all means put it through a proving composition. It's certainly very useful to confirm that you haven't made any mistakes with the length of your touch. You haven't inadvertently composed a pill that's of 4,992 changes, which would be a bit of a disaster. But the other thing about using computers to prove compositions, I would say there's very little benefit in just knocking a composition together without really thinking about what you're doing and then just stuffing it through the proving program, hoping it will be true. You're not really learning anything by doing that. You should sort of go through the whole process properly to make sure that you understand exactly what you're doing and that you've gone through it and taken a structured approach to it. I haven't today. I was planning to talk a little bit about trouble dodging methods, but I wouldn't have covered anything to do with Grantzer, Steadman, spliced, or anything to do with split tenors, which is where we start getting the 7, and in major it's where we start getting the 7 and 8 making bobs. I haven't tried to cover any of that today because I'm just trying to sort of give you a good grip of the basics, which you should be able to use going forward to then actually get onto some of the more complex stuff as well. They will be very similar techniques that will apply, but just slightly tweaked. When you're starting off producing a composition, make sure you always start with a plan. Are you trying to produce something that's simple or complex? Bear in mind the audience, bear in mind the conductor. You don't want to come up with something that's going to be horrendous for the conductor to learn. So you need to think about whether you want to produce a calling that's multi-part or one part. Consider whether your composition is only going to have bobs in it or whether you're going to have singles as well, because that will have quite an impact on the way that you actually prove whether your composition is true or not. And also think about musical considerations that I mentioned earlier. Good resources that you can reference to help you with composing. Well, the only one that I've really come across that I would say is very good is this book, Change Ringing by Wilfred Wilson. You see a couple of comments there from sort of anonymous comments that people have made about this book. The best on basic change ringing composition principles, a timeless classic. So it has got a lot of good stuff in this book about the principles for composing. The only thing is that this book was written in 1965. So a little bit, so some of the stuff in this book is a bit out of date, but actually the principles of the science of change ringing have not changed since 1965. So it does give you lots of good examples, and it's certainly a very good reference book for this sort of thing. I do believe that you can see there are regular adverts of this book in the ringing world, and I think it costs it costs £14 if it's something that you want to pursue. But I would certainly recommend it as something to get you started, and it covers a lot of the material that I've talked about today. That's the end.
John, thank you ever so much. I think there was an enormous amount covered there. I found it fascinating, really interesting. Just looking at the number of comments coming into the chat box, thanking you and saying definitely we need a second session to allow us some time to rewatch the material and go back over things and then sort of look at some of the more complicated aspects of it. I think would be really, really appreciated. We did have a question that came in actually a while back, but and hopefully it'll be a simple one for you to answer. It's certainly not simple for me to answer. From Claire, can you ring 3 touches of 420 changes for a quarter peal of minor?
Only if you arrange them very carefully, so that between them all. No, actually, sorry. I'm going to think about this. No, sorry. The answer to that is no, because you would assume each of your touches would come back to rounds at the end, wouldn't they? So you would have rung rounds 3 times in your quarter peal. The maximum number of times you can ring any one row within a quarter peal would be 2. So that wouldn't be considered a true quarter peal, no.
Super, thank you. It's not really a question, it's a comment, but I think it's really interesting. A comment that Ria asked or said, Pitman did check all rows by hand. And I think it's really interesting when you look at sort of composers, before computers, and that proving that had to be done by hand. It's not really a question, but I think it's I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of proving before computers.
Yeah, well, when I first started off, we didn't have computers. We're just about starting to get personal computers when I first started off my composing, and I'm not really embarrassed to admit that I did compose a false peal, a Bob Major, before I had access to a proving program. Not only did I compose it, but I actually rang it as well for somebody's first peal. These things do happen. Obviously, having computer help now to assist you and stop you making silly mistakes like I did is very useful. But yes, clearly before the advent of computers, people did have to do it all by hand. But they would have done it. Yes, you could write out every single row, and to be absolutely certain that your composition was true, that would be the way to do it. Write out every single row. there would be some shortcuts that you could apply, like some of the ones that I'd mentioned today. But for the Pitman's spliced compositions, that really would have been the only way to be absolutely sure that they were true.
Super, thank you. You've got lots and lots of well-deserved comments coming in, John. Thanking you for this. Just whilst I've got a captive audience, a couple of quick notices. Just as I said to people before, a reminder about all the resources on the good website. Again, I'll make sure that John and Steph have the link so they can send it on to other people as well. Because that's welcome to everyone. Saturday at 10 o'clock, we have for probably mainly for guild members, but other people are welcome to come as well. Our results from the photo competition from the walking tour. So that's on Saturday at 10 o'clock. And next Wednesday, and again, people here today, very, very welcome to come along. Julia Cater is going to be leading the talk on ringing heavy bells, but particularly thinking about the technique that's required with that. So I think that would be something quite different and a really interesting talk as well. And obviously, hopefully, we can twist John's arm to come back and lead us in composing part 2 in a couple of weeks' time. David Sanford just said, hope they didn't mind me joining as a guest. Absolutely not. We welcome people to come to these. So you're very welcome, everyone. And please think about coming to other ones as well. I'm going to ask Steph how she advertised this so widely and got so many people involved, because that's something I certainly need to try and do. So John, lots of thanks for coming in and well deserved. I think that sort of ends the sort of formal bit. If people want to stay around and ask questions, hopefully you'll stay for a little bit, because I won't be able to answer them. Well, I might be able to when I rewatch the videos. Otherwise, we'll reconvene soon. I'm going to stop the recording.